Now, I've had the chance to say this so many times at this year's SaaS Metrics Palooza, but I love welcoming new speakers with new content, fresh ideas. So with that, I really am excited to introduce you to Matt Harney, the founder of Cloud Ratings, where he's going to talk about evolution of SaaS in 2024 and beyond by the numbers. Welcome, Matt.
Thanks, Ray. And I'm going to have to move quick because, as you will see, I try and cover a lot of ground, a lot of detail. And very fittingly, our first slide involves Ray and his great benchmarks from 2022 and 2023. And to try and add some value, we went back and reassembled all of the old Pacific Crest and KeyBank reports and tried to set out a historical data set for the overall industry. And in the bottom right, you can click on the link and we'll share the full report with you. But the key takeaways, when you look at SaaS from 2010 to 2023 and the numbers you're going to see in 2024, on a heat map basis, you just see lots of red. Retention's declined. All forms of customer acquisition costs have worsened. Margins have decreased. Growth has decelerated. It used to be in the 40s. In Ray's benchmarks, it was 27%. And I like to just think about software, and the phrase I've been using recently, it's a maturing growth industry. Right? The growth is still quite strong, particular to other sectors of the economy, but things have matured. Things are different. It's more competitive. It's more sophisticated. And one way to look at that is in the capital markets. If you look back at SaaS from those early KeyBank reports, early Pacific Crest reports, you can barely see the amounts of capital being raised. All the way up through 2015, it barely registers on this graph. And you see how it's evolved and grown and grown and grown, particularly that bubble starting in 2020 all the way through the end of 2022. And interesting quote from an early stage Series A enterprise VC. A decade ago, an interesting category would have 2 to 3 companies at the Series A. Now there can be 10 plus. And we see that in quadrants at the product level, right? We have a quadrant practice here at Cloud Ratings as a research analyst firm. G2 has their grids. On all of these, you see crowding, and there's not a lot of white space or green space in our instances. And even in attractive newer categories, and I'll use an example of demo and pre-sale software, which is inevitable, right? Offering personalized automated demos is just this inevitable trend. It improves the buyer experience, incredibly value added. And there's already a number of sophisticated players in that category. And through our analyst practice, when we look at their financial metrics and revenue figures, the dollars are quite limited, right? And so there you have, a newer category, and you already have lots of competitors for a relatively small pool, at least as it stands today. And that's consistent across the industry. Now, I don't want to make this entire presentation negative, lots of red. There's always good news and opportunity. And we've done some work with our partners at G2, where we studied over 4,000 software companies. And one of the takeaways was that software companies age poorly. Right? As companies mature, they often take price, fail to improve on the product, fail to innovate, and gaps continually open for newer players. Of course, if you're an older software company, that's a bit concerning. And another takeaway from that work with G2 was modest differences in user experience factors add up to a large NPS cap. And if you're an emerging, younger, high-performing company, you do need that outsized NPS to break through, but you can do it. Time and time again, we see companies move from the high performer category into the leading category in our quadrants and G2's quadrants. An important message for today is not all of these NPS drivers are expensive, right? Quality of support is the number one predictor of NPS. And that does not necessarily take a significant amount of dollars. Another one that I really want to harp on today, ease of doing business. As we're seeing lots of vendors take price, be more stringent with contractual terms, more stringent with even factors like credit extension, you have to keep that in mind. Ease of doing business is a top 3 driver of NPS, and you need to be mindful of the longer term impacts of that on your customer relationships. And being easy to do business with doesn't always cost you something. It can be a mentality, it can be a cultural thing, it can just be a point of emphasis for your team, and to revisit, are we a company that's easy to do business with? Getting back to the maturing industry, I like to look at it from the tip of the spear, and one of the leading indicators of what's happening in the software industry are SDRs. And as you look across the history, and we have this from the Bridge Group, which is an excellent sales consultancy, SDRs have more attempts in any given cadence, so effort up, but they're having fewer and fewer quality conversations per day. And this trend is only going to keep accelerating with further automation, let alone what we're going to see with AI, and just how cold outbound looks in general. At the account executive level, I think everyone's familiar with how quota has trended. It used to be in the 74% range. And again, that was back in a more nascent industry, lots of on-tap demand, a lot less competition. And that's trended down. From Bridge Group, it's at the 51% level. From RepView, which is, think of it as Glassdoor for sales, 41% to 48%. And realistically, for a number of people in the audience, their quota attainments are in the 30s, high 20s. Little less focused on than quota would be ramp. In the early days of SaaS, we'll call it 2012, it took 17% of reps 5+ months to ramp. Today, it takes 63% of reps 5+ months to ramp. When I think about that, that's a sign of the maturation. You could plug in a new seller, new to your organization, and they could ramp quickly because they were tapping into unmet demand. There was lots of green space. You were tapping into your early adopters. Now, 2024, every category is competitive. And that new seller needs to be really educated and nuanced because they're going out into the market trying to win very competitive deals with 3-7 products being evaluated by the buying group. And that's not easy. And so that's a sign of the industry maturing. EBSTA and Pavilion have been publishing really, really great sales benchmarks covering roughly $50 billion of opportunities. And one very alarming statistic that I call a check engine light, how much the top sellers are outperforming their peers. As recently as 2022, there was a 4x difference between the top performers and the average performers. Today, it's 10x. And let's translate that. 16% of reps generate 83% of revenue. Now, there's lots of implications with this concentration. One, from a risk factor, right? These are your best sellers. If they were to move on, what does that mean for your organization? And that's very plausible when you think about your top performers. They're sophisticated, they're harder working, they're better in tune with the market, probably closer to the market than you are, and they might realize that they've maximized their territory, they've maximized their customer relationships, and they're moving on. Another way to look at this stat is to invert it. 84% of our reps generate 17% of revenue. Perhaps we have too many reps. Let's look at another alarming statistic, ICP pipeline mix. And again, ICP equals ideal customer profile. ICP represents only 18% of pipeline, and that ICP pipeline has been flat since the beginning of 2023. And I had the founder of EBSTA on my podcast. It's a revenue intelligence platform. And we discussed this dynamic, right? Where you have not all pipeline is created equal, and you have sellers holding on to fake deals, right? Where they're outside of the ICP, there hasn't been deep qualification. So yes, if someone reached out and took a demo, there still might not be sufficient pain or budget, and these deals progress, sales engineering time is wasted, rep time is wasted, and then they fall apart at the end. And a lot of that is chasing marginal deals. The other implication for everyone here is, how do you think about this from how you're spending your marketing dollars, right? If 82% of your pipeline is outside your ICP, why exactly are you generating? Why are you investing marketing? Are there efficiencies there of better targeting? And I know scale matters. Scott Stouffer has an example where they did better targeting for a client of theirs towards the ICP, and they improved win rates by 2x. Now, this is one of the most alarming statistics. 63% of SaaS companies in Pavilion's Pulse report missed revenue in Q2, and that's up from 42%. And the all-time great Dave Kellogg has a great framework, great post. Of course, as I was preparing for this, of course, I was still able to find something from him, and it's about how to think about the sales forecast. And you can see the chart on the right, and I really like the way he simplified it. What does a 90% confidence level mean? I should come in under my forecast once every 2.5 years or 10 quarters. That's just like a very, very great way to simplify it. And when you look at this, if 63% in a quarter, right, these are supposed to be once in a blue moon event, and they're happening regularly. And that's just unacceptable, particularly when you think about the business model, the sophistication of sales, or the compensation in this industry. You just can't be missing this badly, this frequently. And we could really see that in the bubble. We have a great data partnership with People Data Labs, and we have a very active data science practice. And we have a proprietary index of like high signal software companies. And there were signs in 2021 of weakening. We saw it certain public companies starting in November of 2021, even earlier in the year for the 1 million to 5 million ARR companies. So there were signs of the market weakening, particularly by the end of 2021. And when you look at 2022, and we're seeing quota decline, nonetheless, these companies went and increased their sales and marketing capacity by 29%. So they're absolutely ramping capacity, and you can see it on this chart, into a declining market. And particularly so when you think about these 5, 6, 7-month ramps for the new sellers, right? So we're flooding the market with capacity as buyers are buying less. And of course, that ends up leading to firings, that leads to these horrible forecast misses. And so this is just a good indicator of like why you need to be investing in better forecasting and things more at the top of the funnel. We're looking at ways we can work with vendors to help avoid these, because this is just unacceptable, and it's also horrible, right? Where you're bringing people on and then laying them off. There's just no way to run a business. What are some other dynamics we're seeing? Sydney Sloan, who's Chief Marketing Officer at G2, was recently at SaaStr, and some great slides from her. C-suite involvement in purchasing, up 14% year over year. And the good news is, again, let's be positive. Let's think of the solutions. EMSTA and Pavilion have some data. Engaging the C-suite early in the sales stages increases sales velocity by 9x. Top performing companies are 250% more likely to have the C-suite engaged early. Right? So again, there's a solution, involve the C-suite early to respond to their greater involvement. And then another dynamic that's closely related to me is we're moving into an environment of fear of messing up, right? And And the C-suite's involved in these purchasing. There's buying groups, there's more scrutiny, and short lists are shrinking. Right? We're now looking far more likely to be looking at 1 to 3 products versus broader product lists that people were once considering. And the takeaway here, just as much, is focus on the opportunities where you are in that top 3. And if you're number 6 or number 8 on the list, really think hard if you want to invest sales resources into that opportunity. Is that fake pipeline that you're going to hold on to and then nothing's ever going to come? Now, the good news for software, everything comes back to ROI. Why does this industry grow and grow and grow? It's because software fundamentally has business value. The typical company has a hurdle rate that they need to hit to make an investment of around 15%. And if we look at this data from G2 on the right, and you average everything out, the IRR is 50%. So 50% is obviously far greater than 15%. And these paybacks are very attractive. And we can also look at what are the drivers? And 92% of IT ROI has a clear P&L impact. Labor productivity, revenue, cost savings in general. There's IT savings just from moving to the cloud, you're reducing hardware costs. The other implication there is when you're selling on ROI, focus on the areas that have clear P&L impact. Other things like employee experience, compliance, single pane of glass just do not resonate with buyers, particularly the C-suite. More on ROI. ROI is more important than ever. Objections on ROI have increased by 127%. Another factor, when you discuss ROI late, it hurts you. Win rates decrease by 64% when ROI is discussed late stage. The best performers focus on ROI early, qualify out deals that do not have sufficient ROI, and focus on the deals where they do. We can help with this, but I want to keep. Now, some good news, very good news. Iconic Growth just came out with enterprise AI study, 300 real enterprises, and the headline and the way they define ROI is a bit different than you might think. And so let's think about this as improvement. The typical AI app is generating something in a 5 to 20% functional improvement. Many cases above 20%. Really notable strength in marketing, sales, and finance in those plus 20%. And 5 to 20% improvements might not sound all that much, but when you go do the math and you look at the buyer's cost structures, what I will call industrial companies or consumer companies, and you drive, a 15% improvement in a particular area within sales or in finance or in marketing, you're still looking at corporate-wide P&L improvements of 50 basis points, 100 basis points, 200 basis points, which is absolutely phenomenal from an IT initiative. And corporates will buy that again and again because, again, software is driving real business value. We had Matt Slotnick, he's co-founder and CEO of Poggio, which is an AI sales workspace, really helps sellers with their account planning and account research. And he had a great quote. It's not small sales teams with credit cards that can go swipe. It's actually the market-leading companies that like winning because they see AI and think, we won the last game, and now AI helps us win the future. How do we get AI to as many people in our organization as possible? There's 2 ways to look at that. Let's first look at the external. Just like we've been focusing on ICPs. When you're selling your AI product, focus on the winners and leaders. Because just like the ICP, the win rates are 2x to 3x. Scale matters, EBSTA. And it's just a fundamental principle because there's plenty of people who think they should be buying AI or know that they want to get to it, but they're the laggards. They're not well organized. They're fighting fire drills, but it's these top tier companies that have innovation budgets, have strong management, and are willing to invest in R&D and want to go win the next game. Focus on those people. And then there's an internal message from this quote is you want to win the next game. There's huge opportunities, particularly for software companies. Look at this study from McKinsey. Some of the biggest pools, just in aggregate impact, are in marketing and sales, software engineering, customer operations, product and R&D. So these are all fundamental cost areas of a SaaS company. And in aggregate, McKinsey has operating margin improvement of about 7.1% for a high-tech company. And I've seen margin improvement opportunities laid out by other investment firms above that. And so the imperative here is, particularly in a maturing industry with rule of 40s that are trending to unacceptable level, focus on AI internally, lean into it and capture some of that margin. And the last point here is, again, I don't want to be negative about everything, and there are signs of hope. This battery venture study just came out, very high caliber enterprise study, and I think it covered $35 billion of IT spend. And you can see on this chart, the sentiment is rapidly rising. And when you dive into the details, a lot of that is AI driven and AI enablement. There's a lot of work happening at the data level. There's more of an imperative of upgrading your systems to further enable AI in the future. And that, we're cycling through certain cloud cost optimizations and vendor consolidation initiatives, that there is hope. Not everything is perfect, but I do want to, offer a positive message. And there's, evidence entering the market right now that very well might be the case. So what are my key messages? Software is a maturing growth industry, and we see that at the tip of the spear. It all comes back to ROI. And the key message there is have ROI proof and get it in front of the C-suite early. You got to involve these things, ROI and C-suite, early in your cycles. Cloud ratings can help with that. Opportunities. There's always an opportunity to be so good they can't ignore you. Just go outperform your competitors. And that doesn't always cost you something. Offer better support. Be easier to do business with. AI revitalizes the software growth story. We've talked about maturation. Now with all of these new workflows that AI plus SaaS can go address, huge expansions of market opportunity to reaccelerate. And hopefully that's the case for you. And then the last message is these misses we've seen in 2024 and in recent years, the overhiring followed by firings, unacceptable. Invest, it's budget season, do a better job. We're working on ways to try and help you with that. To the extent I can help you offline with some of that work, feel free to contact me. My email is below, my newsletter, my Twitter. And I think I'm at the end. Ray, hopefully I worked through this quickly enough for you.
Wow, that was a lot of data from a lot of different sources and less than 25 minutes. That's pretty impressive.
Well, thank you. Should I leave the presenting view up?
Yeah, why don't you leave it up? Because I do have a couple questions from you and for you. And I also want to highlight that the last thing that you shared, which was the battery venture state of enterprise tech spending, two of the co-authors are going to be presenting that at 2:00 here on Wednesday, 2:00 Pacific time. So you can actually see the in-depth perspective on that. So thank you for sharing that.
Great.
Now, I was shocked at the EPSTA and Pavilion data that said right at 15% of pipeline being built is being built in the core ICP. And I believe that's the data, right?
Correct.
18%. I was shocked on that. Matt, I'd love to get your insight. And why do you think that is? Because everyone's been talking about, they know that they need to narrow their focus with less resources. They're going to focus more on the ICP. And this data is counterintuitive to what everyone seems to be talking about.
It really is. I was shocked by it. In fact, I actually, reached out to some folks, CMOs I know, and they were surprised by it. I actually tried to do some work with some tooling we have internally. And if you guys happen to be Apollo.io users, you can kind of map your contact base. And most of these tools these days have, some lead scoring features, and you can kind of try and do this work with yourselves. And we do a little marketing, we do a little sales. And for us, I don't know, 35% of our contact base fell within, kind of our core ICP of, middle market software companies that might need an ROI report. So perhaps it's not as shocking as the 18% might imply. But from a first principles basis, right, something is wrong, right? Too much fake pipeline, whether it's, AE generated or marketing generated, is in the system.
Well, you mentioned Scott Stauffer, who's the founder and CEO of Scale Matters, and his presentation here at SaaS Metrics Palooza, he showed a company that was basically thought they had great leads coming from the SMB target segment, which was new. But when they started analyzing it, they realized that the win rate was so small, and they were spending paid search. By eliminating that and focusing back on the mid-market, which was their core ICP, that's when they doubled the win rate. So that was all about focusing on the right ICP.
Yeah, I've been impressed interacting with Scale Matters on some of that. You could also look at that as forecasting type work, because some of these spend initiatives, you got to be addressing them early in the cycle for when it gets later and you start seeing quota attainment and all these things. Well, you have to address them at the top of the funnel, right? And play in the future. And I think I want to encourage companies to do more of that.
And then the last thing, and you didn't present it here because you were trying to really focus on all the research that you do and other people's work, but Buyer Ratings has their demand index, correct?
Correct.
So can you tell the audience here a little bit about what that is and what trends you've been seeing the last few months about what product categories are really trending positive?
I would say the headline there is we're cycling out of a really weak second half of 2023. And again, our demand index, we track 340 SaaS companies, like category leading ones, and we look at high intent signals, and they tend to be forward looking by 6 to 9 months. And what we saw was a downturn in high intent signals in the second half of 2023, and that's been registering in the results, actual sales results we're now seeing in 2024. Now there's some good news on the top of the funnel improving. And we're getting back to levels that would imply the industry should be growing in the 20% range. And another thing like our demand index is if you look at GTM headcount of this important basket that we created with People Data Labs, there have been some real growth in sales in these important categories, sales headcount, and that tends to portend good things for the industry. So we're seeing some forward-looking indicators that are positive, but the key message was that second half of 2023 was quite poor, and if you had a poor first half 2024, that could be a kind of macro explanation for some of the things we've seen in terms of actual results.
Well, Matt, I encourage everyone here to subscribe to the SaaS newsletter. It's one of my favorite. Follow you and look at that demand index because, like you said, it can be a leading indicator sometimes portending 6-9 months in advance, and might help CFOs and CEOs here in the audience said, this will be a contributing factor to when do I start doubling down and investing more in my category. Matt Harney, founder of Cloud Ratings and the SaaS Letter, thank you for being a first-time speaker here at SaaS Metrics Palooza 24.
All right, Ray, I really appreciate the invites. Thanks for having me.